King didn't mess around either. It was not only his theater and production company's reputation that was on the line, but as a writer and director, he had everything riding on the success of this show. And you chose Phyllis Hyman.
I don't hear nobody out there.
Glenda was hopeful and confident that Phyllis could pull through when she flew to Dallas to check on the production. She called Oscar Cohen with ABC and said to him, "I think we have a show," Curtis said. This show was going to be the show that was going to get Phyllis back to Broadway. But first, Phyllis had to memorize her lines. Rehearsals for her were torturous affairs. She traveled with 2 personal assistants, Lanice and Leo, who had a hard time getting Phyllis to show up on time, not to mention sober. I would have fired that bitch. I don't have time to coddle, y'all. I just don't. It was rough, recalled Daryl Craig Harris, a member of the show's band. Phyllis was having some personal problems and it affected her ability to learn lines. And of course, before they went out on the road. The thing with Phyllis is that she was drinking, and that's what was kind of causing her problems. Phyllis was frightened because it meant working like she worked in Sophisticated Ladies, in a medium that she hadn't been in for a while, said Glenda. In this role, she had to really act and sing, and it scared her. She had to really be in character. She had to really learn her lines. She had to take directions. And she had to sing in an idiom that she wasn't altogether familiar with. So she really had to professionally hunker down and stretch herself. It was challenging to her, and she wasn't sure she could do it. So she sought comfort from the usual suspects. Now, Glenda girl, I don't know why you even put her in this role. You know she doing her thing with the boogity sugary and the dolls. Why would you even expect her to be able to complete such a task? That's too much pressure for a person like Phyllis Hyman, especially at this point in her life. Child, her addictions are strangling her right now. Phyllis was caught in a vicious cycle, and the patience of the cast and crew eventually began to wear thin as opening night drew near. It was contentious at times, said Daryl. I think Billy liked her and he appreciated her talent, but he really got frustrated with having to repeatedly go over stuff that in his mind they should have already been done with. Billy was no stranger to substance abuse issues himself. He was in fact on probation at the time, stemming from a 1992 plea agreement on charges of assault with a deadly weapon and cocaine possession. He was trying to get his act together, though, and on stage he was the consummate professional. Billy definitely has his issues, said Daryl. But when it comes to music, he didn't mess around. Curtis King didn't mess around either. It was not only his theater and production company's reputation that was on the line, but as a writer and director, he had everything riding on the success of this show. And you chose Phyllis fucking Hyman. If Phyllis could depend on nothing else, there was always her voice. Despite the awful abuses she had subjected her body to in the past decade and a half, despite the pills and booze and binge eating, despite it all, hers was still the voice of satin and stardust. And when the notes began to travel from the depths within and were released into the atmosphere of her audience, her faults were forgiven. The undisputed standout of all of Phyllis's numbers was Bessie Smith's Wasted Life Blues. When Phyllis would do that piece, I tell you, the people would stand up and scream, said Curtis. It was so real. Phyllis said that song was literally like her whole testimony. She would wear that song out. It was very eerie the way she delivered it, because she delivered it like it was almost her eulogy, like she had passed away and her spirit was delivering it to her body. The song came at the end of the first act, and sometimes during rehearsals, Phyllis would be so worn out after finishing the number that she'd have to take 30 to 40 minutes to pull herself together and be able to go on with the second act. The thing about Phyllis is that when she sang, you kind of overlooked the other stuff, said Daryl. I think that's kind of how Curtis, the director, approached it. And the other guys just sort of said, you know what, she's a great singer, so we'll work around the other stuff. Bullshit the baker. Don't accommodate one to sacrifice another. When Blues Bar opened at the Breton Main Theater on September 23rd, Phyllis still didn't have her part down, and the show suffered accordingly. Esther Roll showed up backstage and was not particularly amused when Phyllis, ever the television buff, repeatedly referred to her as Florida. So let me tell you what Phyllis Hyman did. So she backstage at one of the shows, right? In comes Esther Roll, Florida, from Good Times, okay? I don't remember her doing nothing else. I think she was in Roots. I don't know. But I don't remember her doing anything else. Anyway, Esther Roll comes in the back and chit-chat with Phyllis. Phyllis Hyman refuses to call this lady Esther. She called this lady Florida Evans the whole time. Oh, yes, Florida. Oh, yes, ma'am. I loved it, the good time. Girl, tell me something. Was James Pants always that tight, Florida? Florida, tell me this. Was the dude who played Thelma's boyfriend, was he that fine in real life, girl? Luckily, she was surrounded by some great folks, said Daryl. Roger E. Mosley and Antonio Fargas. Those guys were very experienced actors. They helped her out the best they could. But again, a lot of the problems she was having were affecting her ability to really get that going. King developed a genuine affection for Phyllis. When she opened the show, when she came down those steps, she was glamorous, he said. She had some great moments. Sometimes those moments would be so phenomenal. She knew what to do with it when she got it, but she just could not sustain it. I knew she needed a lot of nurturing, Curtis continued. Phyllis was the type of person that would give you anything that she had. She was a very giving person, but she had a tendency to lash out. And I ain't got time for that. I don't give a fuck who you are. She may have been on multiple medications for pain and juggling between crutches and a wheelchair, but she had enough of her senses about her that she wanted to check out the competition. Child, that's because she fell down not paying attention. Not because she was high. She was like, I'm not high. I just tripped up over a monitor. Okay, whatever you say. To her face, Phyllis voraciously praised Auden Berry. Secretly, however, she was envious of her understudy and resented her ability to memorize the role so easily. In Montgomery, Phyllis sat in the front row with a mini flashlight during each performance, a copy of the script situated in her lap. Phyllis would make a notation of every line Ardenberry missed or messed up, and then deliver such to King after her performance. Mr. King, my understudy, she messed up right here, here, and here. But what Mr. King explained to her was that she's your understudy. She's expected to miss a line here and there because she's not doing the show every day. You, on the other hand, my dear, are expected to never fail. but you do. Mr. Director, she would say, waving the noted script in King's face. Okay, Phyllis, what's the point? Curtis pressed. But to Phyllis, it was obvious. The point is, I'm not the only one missing lines. Phyllis was in such a state that she seemed not to know that the understudy was expected to miss lines, and she was too insecure to admit that the unknown was doing a better job in the show than she had. As she recovered from her fractured ankle, Phyllis began spending more and more time in her cramped Manhattan apartment. She was totally lost in her own thoughts, said Glenda. She was imprisoned because between her injury and her weight, it was hard for her. Phyllis watched television, ordered in food, and spent hours on the phone with friends. Damn, that sounds like a vacation to me, baby, she would say. I'm not working. I don't have any money. I'm depressed, and I can't get up and clean this house, recalled Amma Ward, Phyllis's longtime friend. Phyllis knew by now that the road represented a grind she could not escape. Her fuse was short, sometimes virtually non-existent. Songwriter Cynthia Biggs was backstage at the Dale East in Philadelphia earlier in the year when Phyllis summarily dismissed a member of the band in front of a line of waiting fans outside her dressing room. It was explosive, and it was loud, and it was rude, and it was vulgar, said Cynthia. I turned around and apologized to the fans. I turned around and I apologized to the fans that had to see her that upset. And after that, she was in no shape and no condition to do any more autographs. She was just out of control in every way. Cynthia continued. She would have a clear bottle of fluid with her on stage, and it would look like water, but it was vodka. She would get smashed, and as she became more and more inebriated, her behavior basically became more and more irrational. Around her apartment, Phyllis's employees walked on eggshells. Wait a minute, how she got employees? Where she get the money from to pay these mother hunchies? I know these people ain't sitting there taking this abuse for free. And wait a minute, pause. Wasn't this lady bouncing checks a couple of episodes back? It was around her apartment. Phyllis's employees walked on eggshells. It wasn't unusual for staff members working in the apartment to be contacted via the walkie-talkies Phyllis used while on tour from the next room and be told they were washing dishes too loudly. On occasion, laughter even irritated her, and she'd stick her head out of her bedroom to inform staff members that it was a no laughing day. At her worst, Phyllis's outbursts were loud and violently disturbing. People who are bipolar often have no concept of context or proportion, so the slightest infraction is perceived as an all-out attack, and a logical, rational response is not possible. Phyllis at times could not discern the difference between a comment made in jest and an attempted jugular slashing, and hence her retaliations to even humor could be heavy-handed and downright hateful. When basketball star Michael Jordan, who had come out to George's in Chicago to take in Phyllis's show, told her jokingly backstage that she had no man because she was too bossy, Phyllis was livid. She had been about to eat some chitlins brought to her by a friend, but suddenly and rather surprisingly, she said she had no appetite and handed them back to her valet. Wait a minute, hold on. I know this bitch ain't about to eat no chitlins right before she go on the show smelling like old pig guts. Phyllis was furious to find that the valet, who was new, had not put the chitlins from the plate back into the pot and had instead thrown them out. Phyllis screamed at the valet and at assistant Bill Schultz, who had been showing the valet the ropes. Then, without warning, Phyllis flung the half-empty pot at both of them, spraying them with the last of the pig intestines. Okay, pause. I would have sued the fuck out of that bitch. I wonder why I allowed Phyllis to treat me as she did, said Bill. But I always make excuses for her, and I knew deep down she didn't mean it, but that's really not good for a person. Yeah, you sitting there take all that abuse bullshit to back. That bitch be bouncing checks. With Blues Bar suddenly over, Phyllis needed to get back to work as soon as possible. One of the first dates ABC found for her was at Club Bean in nearby Sayreville, New Jersey on November 6th. Phyllis got through the first show without incident, but before the second one began, she was visited backstage by her former percussionist, Myra Casales. When we got there for the second set, she was already very drunk. Casales recalled. She had a drink in her hand and she was spilling it on everybody. By the time Phyllis took the stage for the second show, she was visibly intoxicated. She got up on stage and summoned me to come up, but there was no percussion there or anything. Myra did the best she could, playing a set of drumsticks on the wooden floor of the stage. Afterward, Phyllis sat Myra in a chair and sang Old Friend directly to her. At the song's conclusion, Myra tried to leave the stage, but Phyllis didn't want her to go. Finally, I whispered in her ear, "I've got to go to the bathroom." So I left, and then she wouldn't stop calling me back on the stage. I had to sneak out the club. Once Myra was gone, Phyllis lost it completely. She took the chair Myra had been sitting in and placed it in front of the drummer Paul Mills' drum set. The chair was placed to face the audience, but instead of sitting face front in it, Phyllis straddled the chair and proceeded to sing to Mills. Oh, she up there drunk as shit. Not all was lost, though. If Phyllis returned to New York with a fractured ankle, her heart was once again on the mend. While in Dallas, Phyllis had met William Earl Gray. Oh, yeah. Miss Phyllis, she gonna get some deep. Hollywood, lovely white line, baby Carrie. No other song at all. The Santa Claus, but it is in Hollywood.